Hi, and welcome back to aboutmashiach.com. This is part 3 in the series on depopulation. The first two parts are more the theory on the topic, but this is where the rubber is going to hit the road. We're going to find out which Gentiles will get to survive when Mashiach comes. In the previous video, we saw that there is a spectrum of spiritual identities across humanity. Every human being fits within one of these categories, ranging from a Gentile to a Jew, and there's also a few levels in between. We also saw that when Mashiach comes, there's going to be an urge to convert and become Jewish. However, that's not going to be simple. And therefore, the end state of humanity remains unclear. Now, what we're going to do in this video is have a look at what the Jewish law says on the topic, the Halacha, and that's going to help us determine the implications regarding the depopulation prophecies that we started to explore in the first video. However, before we do that, there is another opinion that says that humanity will actually end up being remaining as Gentiles. So let's have a look at that. So this opinion is written by a rabbi called Shlomo ben Yehuda Aaron. He lived in the end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century, and it's work that he composed on the book on the Talmud, Avodah Zarah. He called his work Avodat Avodah. So on the Talmud that we've seen in the previous video regarding the different opinions, he cites Rashi's opinion that there will be a full conversion. However, he takes a different approach, and he ends off explaining the whole sugya over there, and he ends off saying that Gerim Gurim actually means that they have a din nochrim, they're still considered as Gentile. So not converts at all, still Gentiles. They would want to convert, and that's what they call Gerim Gurim. However, they will remain as Gentile in terms of their status. So what we have now is we have a few possibilities, a few interpretations of the term Gerim Gurim, which is the end state of humanity. One approach that we've seen in the previous video is Rashi's, that there will be a full conversion. That's Gerim Gurim, fully converted. The Maharsha we also saw in the last video, and from his commentary it seems that they will have the status of a resident convert, of a Ger Toshav. And then we've just seen the last opinion, which is that humanity will remain as Gentile. So this is the spectrum. Now if you look at the period of time that these commentaries lived in, you'll see that Rashi is one of the Rishonim. He lived in the in like 1,000 years ago. The Maharsha a few hundred years after that, from the Achronim, and then Avodat Avodah is even a later authority, which is just 200 years ago. So it looks like there's a trend here, and then that trend could actually explain why the opinions seem to shift towards remaining as Gentile. Because if Mashiach was going to come a long time ago at the time of Rashi, then humanity would have had to fully convert to get to that to the Jewish level in order to enjoy the Messianic age. However, as time goes on, it looks like the bar also gets lower, and to the extent that at the end of days, which is where we find ourselves now, the Gentile population is the world, and the Gentile population, which is part of the world, is more ready for the Messianic age, and therefore it doesn't need to undergo like a full-on conversion. But this is just a trend that is noticeable when you look at all these opinions. Now let's see what the Jewish law, the Halacha, says on this topic. When it comes to the topics of the end of days and Messianic themes, we go to the Rambam. He's the only halachic work dealing with the matter, and because he codified the entire Jewish law. And at the very end of his work, the Mishneh Torah, the chapter 11 deals with the laws pertaining to Mashiach the king, and then chapter 12 deals with the days of Mashiach, what's going to happen then. So over there, he says that Mashiach will get the whole world la'avod et Hashem b'yachad, to serve God in unison. And this still doesn't give anything away in terms of whether they're going to convert or not, because the Gentile population can serve God as a Gentile. There's no need to convert in order to serve God, because they have their 7 Nochad laws. So it's still unclear from that. Now, if you go to chapter 12, he mentions something about that as well, and he says that all the Gentiles will return to the true religion, to Judaism, and even that is unclear, because it could mean that they will convert and behave and conduct themselves as full Jews, or they could still remain as Gentile and still serve God on their level with the 7 Nochad laws according to the true religion. So still remains vague. It's unclear about what actually is going to happen. However, what is clear that's going to happen is there's going to be a minimum acceptable standard that the whole humanity will have to abide by. And this is again in the Rambam, a few chapters earlier, where he deals with the laws pertaining to when the Jewish nation conquers a Gentile city. What are the laws associated with that? And this was applicable in the past with King David and the Davidic dynasty, who conquered different nations. And it hasn't been applicable since then, but it's going to be applicable again when Mashiach comes, because there's going to be Jewish sovereignty across the world. So again, it pertains to the Messianic age. So over there, he goes on to say, after dealing with these laws, that it's not only the city, but Moses commanded us from God Almighty, Lachof et kol b'nei olam lekabel mitzvot shenitztavu b'nei Noach, to get the whole world. And again, we see a reference to the whole world, which is again going to be applicable when Mashiach comes. But we have an obligation to get the whole world to accept upon themselves the commandments that Noah was commanded, the 7 Noachad laws. And he goes on to say that if whoever doesn't want to accept those basic 7 laws which humanity needs to abide by in order for the world to exist, then he is the law with that is that he has to die, because that's what the purpose of life is, for him to abide by those laws and ensure that society has continuity. So this is the minimum that is going to apply when Mashiach comes, and there's going to be Jewish sovereignty. King Mashiach will enforce that minimum standard of at least accepting the 7 Nochad laws. Now the Rambam goes on to mention a few laws concerning Ger Toshav, a resident convert, even though he covered them already in the laws of forbidden relations. He mentions a few of them again here, which is seemingly odd. However, we'll see that actually is very timely, because this is the state that the entire Gentile world would be expected to reach. And then in the next law, he describes the level of observance, and it might be a good idea to just translate that. Whoever accepts these 7 laws and is careful to observe them, he is considered a pious Gentile. And what does that mean when he's a pious Gentile? What does he get for that? He is going to get a portion in the world to come, which is not only the Messianic age, but also the era that is going to occur straight after that. However, the condition is that he accepts them and does them because God has commanded that in the Torah through Moses, that that the sons of Noah have to abide by these laws. So that's the condition. And if he does that, then that's what he gets that reward. However, אם עשאן מפני הכרח הדעת, if he does them because it makes sense to him, אין זה גר תושב, he is not considered a resident convert, ואינו מחסידי אומות העולם, and he's neither is he considered as a pious Gentile, ולא מחכמיהם, not even one of the wise men. So this is how he ends off that chapter. So let's now see how that plays out when Mashiach comes. So what will be the practical steps, the journey that the Gentile world will be expected and will indeed take when Mashiach comes? So we're going to have a lot of Gentiles, obviously, so they'll be expected to undertake to observe those 7 Halacha laws, and then that will ensure that they survive. Now, if they go on to do it properly, like we've seen in the previous slide, then they're going to be keeping it because they were commanded in the Torah and observing them with care. And when they get to that level, they're going to get a share in the world to come, in the next world. And this is the obligation. That's what they're expected to achieve. And by the same token, this is the obligation of Jews to help them reach that level, to get to that level. Now we're going to see later on that there's going to be a certain grace period to get from step 1 to step 3. So we'll come back to that. Now if they keep on going, which is discretionary, it's optional, then they accept upon themselves the 7 Halacha in front of a Jewish court, which is not applicable today, but will be applicable when Mashiach comes. And then if they do that, then they reach the level of a resident convert, Ger Toshav. So this is how it looks like. Now, this level of Ger Toshav, we need to understand a bit better. And so this is also why the Rambam brought these laws of Ger Toshav, because that's going to be applicable when Mashiach comes, and getting the whole world to accept those Noach laws ends off with people getting to the level of Ger Toshav, because the other levels which are higher, like which have more obligations, that's not something that necessarily people will be able to attain. However, everyone will be able to attain the level of a Ger Toshav. Now, this level of Ger Toshav is something that we need to understand better. What is the identity of that level? So, who is a resident convert? What's the identity of a Ger Toshav? So, before we address that, let's have a look at a full conversion. A full conversion is composed of 2 steps. One step is departing Gentilism, basically not being a Gentile anymore. And the second level is entering Judaism, becoming a Jew. Now, a resident conversion is just the first level, is departing Gentilism. And we see that from a few of the commentators, like Rabbeinu Gershom, who calls it K'tzat Gerut. And then we have the Meiri, who comments in the Tractate of Yevamot on this level, and he says that a Ger Toshav is half a conversion, Gerut L'Chatza'in, half a conversion. And then we see it clearer in the Taz, who explains the Rambam's approach in the laws of slaughtering, that the Ger Toshav is someone who has departed Gentilism. So he left Gentilism, the first step, but he hasn't entered the level of becoming a Jew. And then even further than that, the Ri Engel goes on to say that he's actually considered an Israelite for the purpose of those 7 Noach laws that he keeps. So we see from here that even though we mentioned that it looks like a formality whether someone is a Gentile that keeps the 7 Noach laws versus someone who becomes a resident convert, it's only a formality, because at the end of the day both levels have the same obligation. However, we see that it's just not just a formality, it's a change of identity. Before he was a Gentile, and once he accepts upon himself the 7 Noach laws in front of a Jewish court, he lives Gentilism. He's not a Gentile anymore. So it's a big change. And with that change is something very interesting, because as we saw, if everybody gets to that level at least, if not the levels higher than that, then are we going to have any more Gentiles? And this is where we come back to the prophecy about depopulation. So you might remember this prophecy. This is something that we explored in the first video in this series. So the verse goes that there's going to be two portions of the population being cut off and expiring, which seems to suggest that 1/3 will be cut off and 1/3 will expire, and the third will remain in it. They'll survive. So that third is obviously those who will convert, like the commentators say on that verse. There's going to be a full conversion, and even that has some steps, but we're not going to cover it in this video. So that third will fully convert, and therefore they'll survive. Now, what about the other 2/3? So we've seen that there's a particular journey that humanity is expected to take when Mashiach comes, from being a Gentile to being a resident convert. Now, not everyone is going to take that journey. Some will remain Gentile and will not want to do it. When I say Gentile, I mean not even accepting the 7 Nochal laws, just doing whatever they used to do until now. They're just not going to have anything to do with it. So that part of the population is going to be cut off, and we'll come back to that part of the population in a future video, God willing. However, the other third is going to keep on going and getting to the level of a resident convert, and this is where expiry comes into it, because the term expiry generally is associated with death, physical death, because that's where the body and the physical reality expires, and then the person moves to a higher reality, to a spiritual reality, only the soul. However, that's not always the case. We find the Targum Yonatan, who translates expiry as a groaning, and also the Midrash Bereshit Rabbah, who translates this term to mean shrinking or freezing, not necessarily death. So even here, when the Gentile population or some of the population will expire, that refers to their gentilism. There won't be any more Gentiles, and therefore that aspect will expire. So basically that aspect will die and be gone, and therefore they'll still be alive, obviously, but not as a Gentile anymore. And their identity will, again, like we saw before, their identity is not necessarily something that you can point your finger to it, because they're no more Gentiles, but they're also not Jews either. So that's how it's possible for the prophecy to be fulfilled in a way that, yes, 1/3 will expire, and we'll come back to that. However, the other 2/3 will still survive. Now, one more thing we need to note, and again, we have to come back to that in a future video, is that even some people that will not end up being a resident convert, they'll still remain Gentile, but observing the 7 Nochal laws with care. Even that will be considered as expiry, but again, we'll have to come back and explain that level. Right, so we'll just come back to deal with that grace period that we mentioned, that it's not necessarily going to happen with a blink of an eye, that all the Gentiles will keep all the 7 Nochal laws. It's a huge shift of a status quo, especially from being like a lot of people are atheists and secular, etc. So let's see what this grace period is about. So we see an allusion to that in the expression of the Rambam that once Mashiach is established as Mashiach, having built the Beit HaMikdash and gathering all the Jews from across the world to the land of Israel, then he's considered Mashiach. And then what's going to happen then? He's going to proceed to fix the whole world to serve God. So that seems to imply that it's going to take some time. There's going to be a period of time that he is going to be busy doing that. And then we also see a reference to that in chapter 12, even though it deals with the days of Mashiach. However, we find a reference there. The Rambam explains an allegory with the lamb and the wolf. That the wolf is compared to the nations of the world are compared to the wolf, and not only just nations. He calls them Rish'ei Akum, the wicked Gentiles. Now, yes, we had a lot of wicked Gentiles. We still have them now, and we had them all along in history. However, when Mashiach comes there, and Mashiach has fixed up the whole world, like you're not going to expect any Gentiles, any wicked Gentiles at that period. So it's a bit odd that we have Rish'ei Akum. However, we're going to understand that by what we explained before, that once the Gentiles have accepted the Nochad laws, then they survive. Right? It might take them time to adjust, and therefore they need that time. However, during that time of training, if we can call it that, until they get to the level of observing them with care, they're still going to be considered as wicked because they're still transgressing these commandments because of the lack of knowledge. So that's why they are called wicked. And we see also a reference to that in the prayers that we say every day. There's a liturgy that we say at the conclusion of every prayer. It's called Alenu L'Shabeach, and it has 2 stanzas. The second stanza, part 2, is actually a pretty interesting description of what's going to happen when Mashiach comes. And we're not going to cover the whole thing, even though there's a lot of analogies between what's happening in this prayer and what we've dealt with in this video. However, we're just going to touch one point, which is the Gentile population is mentioned 3 times in this stanza. Actually, the whole stanza is about the Gentile population, which is again another hint that that's what the Messianic age is about. And so we've got three they're described in 3 different ways. The first one is Bnei Basar, which means flesh and blood. The third one is Yoshvei Tevel, the inhabitants of the world. And then in the middle, there's a reference to them as Rish'ei Aretz, the wicked of the land. Again, why do we have wicked people when Mashiach came already and we fixed up the whole world? There's no more foreign gods, and the whole world is functioning according to the Torah. Why do we still have wicked people? Again, the same reason. They are wicked people because they still they have ill practices from the past, and it takes them time to adjust. So there's a grace period. However, during that period, they are turning towards God until they get to good on that. So that's why they're called their Rish'ei Aretz. Now, after we've seen all the above, it's still possible that all the Gentiles will fully convert. We haven't ruled that out. The Rambam was vague, as you recall. But even if the Rambam speaks of Gentiles as remaining as Gentiles, it's known that the Rambam deals with the basics, with the minimum that's going to apply. That must happen. However, it could happen in a higher fashion. Like he says, there's not going to be any miracles, but we know there will be miracles. And in fact, the Rambam himself, in his later work, did say that it's not necessarily that's going to be the case. So if he says that the Gentile population will remain as Gentile, that's not necessarily the case. It could be and could end up being on a higher level. Another reason is that the Rambam is known to deal with the Messianic age only in the first part of the Messianic age. He doesn't necessarily deal with what's going to happen after that. So after that, it could be that people will move on and fully convert, even though they haven't done that in the beginning of the Messianic age. And then, as we've mentioned already, it could be that some people will fully convert, so not everyone. And then there'll be a difference in levels. So let's summarize what we've seen in this video. There's also going to be a spectrum of end states for the Gentiles. It's unclear how they'll end up being. However, we know that there'll be a minimum and at least a temporary threshold that everybody will have to get to, and that is to undertake to observe the 7 Noachad laws. There's going to be a grace period to get to that level, and with the optimum level is observing them with care. And it's also going to be easy to proceed further and get to the level of resident convert, ger toshav. However, we've seen that there's a sort of danger, if we can call it a danger, of if everybody gets to that level, there won't be any more Gentiles. That's okay. That's how it's meant to happen. And that expiry is not necessarily true. And then the last thing we've seen is that those who will not reach the minimum level, so we need to get back to them and see who these people are, and how exactly what's going to happen to them. So that hopefully, God willing, we'll cover in the next video.